Welcome back to Podio Commentary. This is the first episode of 2025, a little later than I wanted. To be fair, I wanted to come back with a vengeance on J1, not January 8th, but of course, you know, life, family, kids, sickness, work, all the things get in the way. But welcome back, guys. As we enter into 2025 and beyond, Podio Commentary is going to be a main staple here on the channel. Of course, the podcast is all about the love of movies, all about the allure of movies, all about what I like about them and what speaks to me about not only the production history of movies, the box office, critical reception, what I think of the film overall. I mean, movies are a lifeline to the imaginary, to the wonderful, to the majestic, and every movie is designed to take us on a journey. And it's my philosophy that there are no bad movies. Now, some miss the mark, obviously, but no, really, honest to God, I don't think there's really any such thing as a bad movie, especially one that was made with good intentions. You know, there are definitely cynical, bitter, nihilistic films, studio slop, all that kind of stuff. But I don't believe that the artist who is behind it is ever going to go into it and be like, yeah, this sucks, but we have to just do it. I mean, maybe, I don't know. It's not my philosophy. And I've seen probably around 2,500 to 3,000 movies in my lifetime. And there are ones that I definitely don't ever feel like going back to. But, for the most part, I just like them. I just love falling in love with movies. I'm a hopeless romantic for them. And that's what this show is supposed to be. And I've grappled with a multitude of different formats over, I guess you could argue, the years now that I've been trying to get this off the ground. When in reality, I just need to talk about it. I just need to talk about the movie and go into it in the way that's going to work best for me. And as always, I want this to be an audience-backed endeavor. Meaning, I want you guys to tell me what movies you want me to cover. You guys can support the show by heading over to patreon.com/Matt Jarbo and signing up over there. You can pay me to watch movies is basically what it boils down to. But trust me, I will go the full line. I will make it work. Make it worth your while. That being said, why don't we move away from the shilling, which is always the worst part of the show, and talk about the 1999 gothic horror, I guess, Sleepy Hollow. I don't, they call it a gothic horror. They call it gothic because it is, it's gothic. Okay. I'll admit that, but they call it gothic because Tim Burton is attached to it. In reality, it's not, it's more folklore horror than it is gothic horror. And I really do feel like we kind of got to have that distinction at this point. It doesn't take place in the city. It takes place in the countryside. It doesn't deal with Victorian era horror. I mean, it kind of does, but it takes place in folk horror, right? Out there with the folk in the woods in the Sleepy Hollow. Obviously, telling an old ghost story and things along those lines. But, I recently bought the 4K of this. And that's going to be a big thing you're going to be hearing me say a lot, by the way, in this year. A lot of the movies I'm going to be talking about are movies that I've been purchasing on physical media. I have a lot that I need to get to and a lot that I want to talk to. And yes, there's going to be new movies I want to kind of dive into, but there's also going to be a bunch of older films that I own that I'm looking for excuses to watch either for the first time or watch again. Like I recently picked up Friday the 13th, 2009 Arrow 4K, as well as the Demolition Man Arrow 4K. Oh goddamn. There's the Barnes and Noble sale right now, so I've got like the Clash of the Titans, Wrath of the Titans double set coming, as well as the Hellraiser Quartet of Torment coming. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys here. I'm gonna spill a little bit of the sauce, a little bit of the tea. I've never seen any Hellraiser movie, but I bought that box set for $60 because it's a good deal. You guys, if you're new here, you're going to discover I love movies. That is what it boils down to, right? They make me feel a way that I can't explain. They bring me so much joy. And it's not just me. It's so many other people. And the idea behind Podio Commentary, to kind of go back for a hot second, is I just want to gush about a movie for like 25, 30 minutes. And then we can talk about it and maybe a live stream every once in a while. I'd like to do more live streams where we can get everyone together, talk about films, new and old. I'm just trying to figure out my life. I work a lot, so it's hard to be able to sit down and do everything I want to do. So I'm going to start slowly, and we'll be able to build from there. Kind of like Sleepy Hollow started off originally in 1993 when Kevin Yeager, who was a makeup effects designer who'd worked on like Tales from the Crypt, and apparently he had also helped to design Freddy Krueger, had the notion, and this, yes, I'm pulling a lot of this from Wikipedia, to adapt Washington Irving's short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And if you don't know what this story is, it's about a headless horseman in a small town in New York, away in the countryside, that is being tormented by the Headless Horseman. And Detective Ichabod Crane has to go in to solve the mystery. And it's a compelling mystery. And what they were able to do with this particular script, I think, eventually is get it to a point of making it not only atmospheric and spooky and everything else, but man, so much fun to watch. However, it didn't start that way. When Kevin Yeager decided he wanted to turn this into a movie, he went to his agent and he was like, "Hey bro, hook me up with somebody who can write this thing." And it was here that he was introduced to Andrew Kevin Walker. And Andrew Kevin Walker wrote Seven for David Fincher. And that just hit 4K, by the way, and I need to go get my copy. Surprisingly, real quick side note, it's like $25 brand new. That's a good deal for a brand new 4K, especially one as allotted as 7. That's been on my mind. I need to go to the store and buy it or whatever. I spend a lot of money on these movies. Anyway, it was when they came together that they decided to... I was wrong. Sorry, I want to go back here. It was them who changed Ichabod from being a schoolmaster to a New York City detective. I want to make sure I got that one correctly there. And it was here that they were able to get a deal with producer Scott Rudin, who had been impressed with Walker's work on the original unproduced spec script for Seven. Now, let me quickly put aside here. Have you ever wondered why you'll watch a movie and like it will be kind of bad? I don't want to say bad because I said there's no bad movies, but it's like, you'll watch a movie and you're like, what the writing is maybe not great. The story is kind of disheveled. It feels kind of cobbled together. And that's a lot of modern movies, by the way. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's like the writer will write the spec script. The studio will hire them and then the writer will turn in their drafts. And then the studio will be like, okay, great. Here's a director. The director wants to put their own take on it. The actors want to put their own take on it. Producers want to put their own take on it. And it becomes Frankenstein. But the way that the WGA credit system works is basically that person's name is the one who gets brought up on the screen, even though it could be wildly different than anything they actually originally submitted. However, those accolades, the film getting to screen and having that under his belt or their belt, will then allow them to meet with other producers to write better scripts in hopes of maybe one day actually getting a script out there that is reflective of their work. Hollywood as a system is so bad at that particular, at that front. And it's been going on since forever. So it really is better, I think, to look at films that are written and directed by the same person, because at least then, there's some form of consistency. I'm just going off on a bit of a tangent on that one. Now, the thing with this is that Rudin optioned the script with Paramount Pictures, and they wanted Yeager to direct with Walker scripting, and the pair would then share story credit. Now, Yeager had then gone on to do Hellraiser Bloodline, and afterward he got to work on Sleepy Hollow, and he was describing it as a low-budget effects showcase with a spectacular murder every 5 minutes or so. And then Andrew Kevin Walker kind of described it as a pretentious slasher movie, which it doesn't, I'm not going to, like, right off the bat, that doesn't necessarily feel like the thing that you should really be going for here, right? This is a mystery. Having it be kind of a pretentious slasher would really kind of like turn it into something that you would get out of like an 80s slasher, right? Like Jason, Freddy, Chucky, whatever. Something where the horseman has the personality. And that's what people are drawn to. When in reality, the horseman is the unstoppable devil, and Ichabod is the hero that you're meant to really resonate with, right? Obvious, I mean, like, he's like the final girl, let's be fair. In this case, he'd be like the final girl. But Paramount, they had their own reservations about the movie, interpreting it as more of a typical period piece. There was another producer on the film, Adam Schroeder, who went on record as saying, I wouldn't say they weren't enthusiastic about it, but they didn't see the commercial viability. He thinks that the studios thinks old literary classic and they think The Crucible. There is a fear about that. We started developing it before horror movies came back. And it's not to say that horror movies were dead in the early 90s, but they definitely had a resurgence with, like, let's say Scream. Maybe in the early 90s, I was young. So maybe back then there was stuff that, there's more conservativeness in Hollywood back then. They had more money than ever before, but there was still like a level of like conservatism in regards to this content. Just last night I was watching the documentary George A. Romero's Resident Evil, and again, same concept, pulled up on that one. Constantine Films did not know what the hell to do with the script that was all bloody and gory, and Romero had turned in, and the whole thing ended up falling apart, and we ended up getting the Paul W.S. Anderson movie, which, by the way, was written as a Resident Evil movie, but was presented as a non-Resident Evil script. Something that could then be kind of 50 Shades of Greyed into its own monster and then taken to another studio and made. It's kind of frustrating when we talk about the adaptations, but I think turning this adaptation of a schoolmaster into a detective makes more sense given the overall idea of it. Now, it was around 1998 when Paramount CEO Sherry Lansing revived studio interest in the film. Schroeder, the producer I'd mentioned before, who had shepherded Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands as a studio executive at 20th Century Fox, suggested that Burton direct the movie. Francis Ford Coppola's minimal production duties, in this particular point, American Zoetrope is a producer on the movie. Fun fact about that. American Zoetrope also funded Jeepers Creepers. Look into I've talked about those movies before, but look into the history of those movies. Francis Ford Coppola is a weird guy on that particular stuff, but it was kind of cool to see that you had some pedigree. There's a lot of pedigree in this movie, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera. And apparently Burton himself only became aware of Coppola's involvement during like the editing process when he was sent a copy of the trailer and saw Francis Ford Coppola's name on it. Funny little side story to that. When I was at Comic-Con in 2009, they finally got Tim Burton to go to Comic-Con to win I think it was the Inkpot Award, which is a big deal for Comic-Con. And he was there at the 9 panel, the animated film 9. And the funny thing about that was people were asking him what it was like to work on the movie. And he was like, I literally just made phone calls. But his name was all over it because they needed Tim Burton as a way to bring in potential investors. And again, going back to that George Romero Resident Evil thing, because I just want to show this as like a parallel. Romero himself even said that Constantine Films never officially fired him from the job and were still touting his name around as a way, in his words, in his belief, that they were using George Romero's name without him being involved in the movie in order to secure investments, because that name has pedigree. Tim Burton's name has pedigree. Francis Ford Coppola's name, at least in the 90s, had pedigree. So it's interesting, right? And so around this time, when they were getting ready to put this movie together, Burton had, come off of the very troubled production of Superman Lives. And that's a whole other thing. There's a whole documentary out there by John Schnepp, may he rest in peace, called The Death of Superman Lives. It was a really good documentary. But Burton was hired to direct the movie in June of 1998. And it was actually at this particular point that Yeager stepped down with good grace, remaining involved in the project as the lead creature effects artist. And I find that to be kind of you got to give it to Kevin Yeager on that. You really do. This guy, 5 years prior, was like, hey, you know what I want to do? I want to adapt The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So he goes and he, works with the guy who wrote Seven. They get Paramount involved. They get stuff going. And then it was years later, they're like, yeah, we're going to give it to Tim Burton. And he's like, okay, I'll just go back to working on the creatures, which, if that's what he loves to do, by all means. You know what I'm saying? It's like you might as well take the win, take the paycheck, take the credit, is a lot of this kind of stuff. Now, right here, Tim Burton was a little bit apprehensive because he'd never dove into horror making before. You know, Beetlejuice is a 10 out of 10, obviously, but it's not a horror movie. Edward Scissorhands, that's more of a gothic, modern gothic. I'll give it that. I'll give that tone gothic. And then, but not, you know, there's some horror elements with Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I mean, there are things that he had done that were maybe kind of like dipping the toe into horror, but yeah, he had never really done it. But the reason what drew him to this predominantly was his love of Hammer horror films. And Black Sunday, this says here, his love of Hammer film productions and Black Sunday, particularly the supernatural feel they evoked as a result of being filmed primarily on sound stages. And as a result, Sleepy Hollow itself kind of ended up being very much made in homage to Hammer film productions, including Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, various Roger Corman horror films, Jason and the Argonauts, Scream, Blackula Scream. These are movies that all inspired Tim Burton in regards to kind of putting this thing together. But it was the image of the Headless Horseman that fascinated Burton during his apprenticeship as a Disney animator at CalArts in the early 1980s. He says here, one teacher had worked with Disney version as one of the layout artists on The Chase, and he brought in some layouts from it, so that was exciting. It was one of the things that maybe shaped what I like to do. Well, if you think about that, it kind of makes sense, right? The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Disney animated short, is atmospheric. It is creepy. You know, it's something that is definitely going to frighten some kids that are of a certain age. And that might have kind of really helped put Burton in that mindset of what could be creepy yet accessible. And he's really, really, really good at that. So I think it's something we can definitely like take note from and go, oh yeah, like this was like a really good approach to his brand of storytelling. And I don't want to say Burton's fallen off in recent years. I really enjoyed Beetlejuice. My issue with that was like this, I think there's like a director's cut out there that might flesh out the multiple plot points. Whereas Beetlejuice itself is a wildly simple film and it's effective in its simplicity. And I think even Sleepy Hollow, to an extent, ends up having a very similar notion because the movie is not complicated, right? When you get to the end, you're like, oh, okay, it all gets kind of wrapped up in a nice, neat little bow. But the mystery to get there is interesting enough. It becomes a whodunit, and you never really know if it's going to zig when you think it's going to zag, sort of thing. Now, when it came to casting Ichabod Crane, Johnny Depp was Tim Burton's like first and real like only choice. However, Paramount was like, sup, bro, can't do Johnny Depp. He's not, he's not that kind of guy yet. Have you considered Brad Pitt, Liam Neeson, Daniel Day-Lewis? Like, they wanted him to do all of these things. They wanted him to like really bring in the big heavy hitters. But ultimately, Depp got the role in 1998, and this was his third collaboration with Burton. Depp, when he was looking at the character of Ichabod Crane, really wanted to like parallel Washington Irving's description of the character. He had like, in the story, he had like a long, snipe nose, huge ears, elongated fingers, very eccentric, very stylized. And Paramount said, hell no, we ain't doing that, bro. They're not going to, that's like, you put Johnny Depp on the cover of this. And Johnny Depp, at the time, this is like 1998. He's 61 years old right now. So, he would have been like in his, he would have been in his 30s or 30s around that time. And it's very much the idea there of like, no, Johnny Depp is like attractive. Women love Johnny Depp. Men love Johnny Depp. People love Johnny Depp. People want to see him in this movie. They're going to want to make sure that he is, they're going to like, yeah, he can be a bit demure. He can be, whatever, but they still want him to be Johnny Depp. So Paramount, they shut it down. But he wanted to like really make Ichabod more in touch with his feminine side though. Right. And more kind of feminized and a bit more, he's a scaredy cat in the movie. He's a detective. He overthinks everything. He's very smart. but his bravery is not something that's fully on display. And a lot of that has to do with the traumatic elements of his childhood, which we see through the movie, which, by the way, the mom, I forget her name right now, but the mom, Ichabod's mom at the time was Tim Burton's girlfriend or wife or whatever. This is before he met Helena Bonham Carter. If you notice, after he hooked up with Helena Bonham Carter, she was in all of his movies. And then they broke up, and now he's with Monica Bellucci, and Monica Bellucci was the bad guy in Beetlejuice 2. Just saying, Tim Burton, man, whoever you're getting with, they get work. But Tim Burton had a really interesting response to Johnny Depp not wanting to portray Ichabod in like the typical action star mentality, right? You know, he wanted something like Angela Lansbury's performance in Death on the Nile, which I'll admit that I haven't seen. And Burton agreed with that. He was like, this is good. He's like, because he goes, this is a direct quote, because I'm not the greatest action director or the greatest director in any genre, and he's not the greatest action star or the greatest star in any genre. This is what allowed them to kind of go into the mode that they did for the movie. Now, granted, 5 years or later from the casting, we get Pirates of the Caribbean, and that did kind of solidify Johnny Depp as a bit of an action star, even though it, well, that whole thing's, I love those movies, but they have some problems. Also, Jeffrey Jones came back, who was in Beetlejuice and Ed Wood the last time Jeffrey Jones would work with Tim Burton directly. He does have a bit of a cameo, character-wise, and imaging in Beetlejuice 2. And if you don't know what happened to Jeffrey Jones, Google it. It's crazy. Christopher Walken comes back this time. You got Martin Landau is in a cameo role. Michael Gough, Alfred from Burton's Batman films, who Burton was able to get out of retirement for The Notary. And then also the Hammer influence was there because Christopher Lee has a small cameo appearance in the movie as well. Like I said, this movie is stacked with cast. It's got it. Oh, never mind Christina Ricci, who, by the way, they kind of found, I upon rewatching, I did find the relationship between Ichabod and Christina Ricci's character a little bit on the weird side. And I say that because initially Christina Ricci had met Johnny Depp when he was 27 and she was 9, because he's a solid 18 years older than her. So she would have been in like a 20, right? 1920 when they filmed this movie. And then they're playing love interests. It's kind of weird. Like the vibe I got even watching it was more of like a brother sister thing, not with like a Brazzers logo attached to it or anything like that. But it was kind of just like this instant, like, I don't know if I buy it, right? I get the love interest aspect. I understand what's going on, but I can't say I necessarily buy it. Now, when it was time to film the movie, they shot it over in London. They shot it where they didn't want to, actually. They wanted to film it in upstate New York. However, they didn't do it. They went to Britain and they shot it at Leavesden Film Studios, which had recently been vacated by none other than The Phantom Menace. And that's where they shot most of the movie, as well as some other work at Shepperton Studios, which is where the massive Tree of the Dead set was built. And they also then moved to Cudlin Faw Estate in Hambledon for a month-long shoot in March of 1999, where the town of Sleepy Hollow was then constructed. So they shot the whole, and that might be the element of the Gothic side of things, right? Shooting the movie in England, in those kind of environments. I do feel that a lot of people would resonate with that from a visual perspective. When looking at it, though, now I'm kind of like, yeah, okay. Right? Like, it's a small town. It's a small set. You could have shot it in upstate New York. You could have done that. But they're probably getting the incentives to film over in London. The whole thing, it did work really well for it. You know what I'm saying? So they wrapped production of the film in around April, May of 1999. And the movie was released on November 16th, 1999. Burton is kind of known for doing that. Batman 1989 finished filming in like February of that year, and the movie released in June. Like, there are even reports from back then that the film print itself didn't even have enough time to really dry before they started sending copies out to the different theaters, because that's how quickly that whole thing came together. The movie, thinking about the movie itself, because I want to kind of talk about that now. Watching it again, Danny Elfman's score is something very synonymous, obviously, with Tim Burton, but it works so well. It sets the tone for what you are going to see in the style of Burton. Burton's signature tone is so amplified by what Danny Elfman brings to the table. And it's one that, again, is kind of like, what you're in for when you sit down to watch a Tim Burton movie, and the theme song is done by Danny Elfman. It's a great collaboration. That's one of the reasons why I think Burton, when he works with the right people, does such a great job. When you get into like the story of this and everyone starts dying by the hands of the Headless Horseman, it becomes compelling because it's like the way that they shot it, it feels like there is dread on the horizon. Something is coming, but at the same time, you also know that like the person is going to die. So there's not really a lot of suspense in that particular factor, which I thought was maybe kind of an issue, right? Like the only, real time you're going to end up getting suspense is maybe towards like the very end when the Reverend and played by Jeffrey Jones and Ian McDermott kind of turn on each other in a hot second. And then Michael Gambon, who ends up like shooting Jeffrey Jones dead right before he gets impaled by the spear from the Headless Horseman, who can't enter church grounds, and then drags him out. I mean, like that whole sequence was great. That sequence was definitely kind of intense. But other than that, like every time you see the Headless Horseman, like he's gonna murk someone, right? And there's a scene in the movie where he murks an entire family. And that, oh my God, that scene was great. Cause like, he's like, you're like, is he going to go that far? Is he going to go that far? And he totally goes that far. You just don't see it, right? Cause one of the things you can never really do is you can never really have like children getting killed. I mean, unless you're Uwe Boll doing like Postal, but really you can't show kids getting killed. But the idea there of like the husband, the wife, and then the baby underneath the crawl space of the house, the, light from the candle, that little, whatever it's called, like just the cinematography was great on this. It just really set the tone, really set the mood, really set the atmosphere. And then the kid makes a noise and like, yeah, that kid's dead. Right. But like, you never see like that. And then like the next shot is like the Headless Horseman, like leaving the house, like, tying up a bag. And you don't know if he beheaded the kid because no one ever mentions the kid, which only leads me to believe that just like, they didn't know that the body was there, and they might have mentioned him really briefly, but I just have a feeling that like, if the kid was underneath the house and he was killed underneath the house, there's a high probability that like, they're just like, we don't know where he's at, cause like no one really brought it up. But I loved the aesthetic. I loved the cast. Miranda Richardson was great. You could sense that there was something off with her. Again, it's a whodunit. And, and I knew the outcome because I saw the movie when it first came out on home video back in 2000. When the movie released in theaters, I was actually in the process of basically moving from Portland, Oregon down to San Diego. So I missed it entirely in theaters. Caught it when it came out on DVD, really enjoyed the hell out of it. And, and I loved like her whole story there, right? It was all about greed, and it was all about witches. And it was all about like, the mercenaries, like the Hessian mercenaries, and how violent and crazy they were. And really it's kind of like, they're just Germans, is just to be fair. It's kind of what they are. But I just like the story of like, there's the witch in the woods, and she's the twin of Miranda Richardson's character. And then Miranda Richardson, sold her soul to Satan when they were like 9 in order to use the Headless Horseman to get what she wants. All because she was mad that her family was booted out of this shack on a property when like their dad died, or like when the Lord died or something, right? Like it was something they ended up getting evicted, and she was really mad at like her landlords. So she wanted to just work her way into this position and then start systematically murdering everybody in order to get herself everything. As far as like what you could almost argue like a James Bondian style plot, it's great. You know, it's great because she does manipulate everybody. And she does it like in her own different ways. And then you've got Christina Ricci's character who is doing all of the spellbound witchcraft stuff, you know, and so they're kind of setting it up like she's the reason the head, you know, no one would ever buy that. There wasn't that was kind of, I think, a little bit of a wasted thing right there, because it's like, obviously that was meant to be the big reveal that she is casting these spells of people for people that she loves. And she met Ichabod one time and she's like, damn, you know, you could, I'm not going to make the joke, but she really liked him. But they don't really have a lot of time together. And that was kind of, you know, the Casper Van Dien boyfriend thing. Like, he had a great death, by the way. Like, he was like, I'm just going to stupidly run up and fight this guy. And then he just gets cleaved in two. And then later on, there's I think it's like the next day or whatever, when she's talking with Ichabod and he's like, well, I'm so sorry about your guy. And she's like, oh, I've already cried all the tears for that dude, but I was more worried about you. I'm like, you just met this guy. You just met this guy. Like, does he have like a beer flavored ball sack? Like, what's going on here? I have no idea. But I just thought it was so funny. Like, their relationship was like, I would argue probably like the weakest part of the whole movie for me was their relationship, because it felt so forced. It felt so absolutely forced when everything else was really, really, really good. All of the mystery, all of the setup, the slight reveals here and there of like the pregnant woman who was beheaded, and like the family tree and who owns all the properties, and it's like all of that storyline was really good. But you have to have a love story in here, and I feel like that's the most like tacked on thing, right? It just didn't work out very well for me, in my opinion. But otherwise, other than that, it's great. I got to admit though, love the ending of the movie when they go to the windmill and the windmill's on fire, and like they're trying to get away from the Headless Horseman. Like, none of it impacts him. At that point, it kind of goes full pretentious slasher mode. And then they get into the horse chase scene to go back to the Tree of the Dead. And then they do all of that stuff with, with him, and he gets his head back and he grabs Miranda Richardson, drags her in there, and she dies. And then he goes back to sleep and everything is fine. I mean, the village lost so many people. So many heads were in that tree. And then of course they all leave, go to New York. And what I loved about Christina Ricci in that one, her dress was very much designed like Beetlejuice, which was a nice throwback to Beetlejuice, actually. I thought that was really good, with them all going to New York to live together happily ever after. Had a good ending to the movie. Again, but even though I like the ending of it, their whole relationship was still kind of odd to me. But it turns out that a lot of people did really enjoy this movie. It grossed $30 million in its opening weekend, opening number 2 behind The World Is Not Enough. James Bond, great film. Well, I will say The World has one of the worst ending lines ever, which when I talk about that movie, I will talk about that. It ultimately ended up dropping into 4th place behind Toy Story 2 and End of Days. But it did end up doing a total worldwide gross of $207 million, which is for like, you guys, for like the end of the millennium, the end of the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s, that was good numbers back then. Paramount then released the movie on home video and DVD VHS on May 23rd, 2000. And then 6 years later, the HD DVD release came out. Now, that's one I want to collect. I have this thing. I want to collect all of the HD DVDs. I have a collection of them. If I find them in the wild, I will generally pick them up. I don't know how many there are. I'm just giving them a good home. But then a couple years later, June 2008, the Blu-ray came out. And there was even apparently an unofficial video game adaptation called Cursed Fates, The Headless Horseman, which was released by Phenomen Games and Big Fish Games in 2013. So I guess if you want to play the game, you can do that. There was also what the critics thought, and they gave it a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it got a positive status. And, some people said, like, it isn't Tim Burton's best work, but it entertains. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars out of 4 and said this is the best looking horror film since Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. And he did go on to praise Johnny Depp's performance and Tim Burton's methods of visual design, saying that Johnny Depp is an actor able to disappear into characters, never more readily than in one of Burton's films, which is true. It's Johnny Depp, but he is able to play a multitude of different characters. It's very similar to Captain Jack Sparrow. And it worked out real well, right? I love Johnny Depp. I would love it if he dropped the booze, get his shit together, and come back with a vengeance. You know what I mean? Anyway, that's my own personal take on that one there. Oddly enough, on June 10th, 2022, Paramount did announce plans to reboot Sleepy Hollow with Lindsay Beer in talks to write and direct it. Well, it's been 2.5 years and there's been nothing. I don't think you need to reboot the legend of Sleepy Hollow. If you recall, Fox did that as a television show. And what was really funny about that is go back and watch it again. Go back and find the pilot. Clancy Brown plays a sheriff in that show, and he ends up getting beheaded by the Headless Horseman, which I thought was one of the all-time greatest references to Highlander. If you know, you know. And if you love movies, you should know. Anyway, all in all, I look at something like Sleepy Hollow and I think this is a good, solid movie. I hadn't watched it in 20 some odd years. And so it was basically like a first time watch again. Like I knew everything going into it. But when I sit down and I find myself just being enthralled by what I'm seeing, it's very quick paced. It gets the job done. You get in, you get out, and you're entertained. And that is honestly what movies should be. But you are able to allow yourself to kind of dip into this world, to kind of go into the atmosphere, enjoy all the spookiness of it, even though it's got a couple issues with like the romance plot line. But yeah, I love it. I'm waiting for my kids to get a little bit older so I can show it to them. I think it's a good kind of gateway horror film. For like preteens, teens, not like 7.5, which is what they are right now. Because I showed my daughter the 4K case of this yesterday, and she was like, like, what is this? I'm like, oh, it's a spooky movie, and she's like, but she's been looking at it. I know she wants to watch it. So we'll see what happens with that one. But anyway, guys, please leave your thoughts, your opinions. You can find me on Twitter at mjarbo. You can find me on Blue Sky at Hollywood AD. You can find me on Letterboxd, I think as mjarbo, I think is my name on there. mjarbo, yeah, on Letterboxd. And let me know your thoughts and your opinions on this. And if you have any movies you want me to watch, let me know. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podio Commentary. Have a great one, and peace out.